For 20 years, my stepdaughter continuously disrespected me, and her mom supported her. Immediately, she saw that I started writing my will. She started being nice and sweet to me. 2 weeks later, she demanded for the company to be willed to her. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Nora Anderson from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never expected to be the villain in my own home. When I married Sandra, I wasn't looking to replace anyone. Her daughter, Kelsey, was 13 at the time, awkward, moody, and mourning the father who walked out on them 2 years earlier. I understood that pain, or at least I tried to. I gave her space. I never insisted she call me dad. I was patient, attentive, careful not to overstep. I showed up to every recital, helped with math homework, even kept my distance when she slammed doors or rolled her eyes. For the first 5 years, I told myself it was normal, just teenage hormones, the rocky transition of a blended family. I believed if I kept showing up, she'd eventually see me for what I truly was. Someone who wanted to love her without condition. Someone who married her mother, but made room in his heart for her too. But Kelsey had a knack for subtle sabotage. Never direct insults. No, she was too clever for that. She'd mimic my voice behind my back, roll her eyes dramatically when I made a suggestion, whisper things to Sandra when she thought I was out of earshot. He's not even blood. Why does he always act like he owns this place? I'd catch fragments, small stings at first, like little bee bites you try to ignore. I remember once she told her friend on speakerphone, loud enough for the whole living room to hear. I swear, he thinks he's my dad. Like, get a clue. That was the first time I truly felt the weight of being unwanted in a home I was helping build. And still, Sandra said nothing. She'd smooth things over later, telling me, she's going through a phase, or she doesn't mean it, babe. But after years of brushing it off, the phase stopped feeling temporary. It started to feel like permanence. I built my company from scratch. 12-hour days, no vacations, reinvesting every cent I made for the first 5 years. It wasn't glamorous, it was grimy, it was exhausting, but it was mine. When Sandra and I got married, she was working part-time and struggling to raise Kelsey alone. I brought them stability. I gave them a home in a neighborhood where kids rode bikes without fear, where the lawns were manicured, where Christmas lights didn't get stolen. And yet, I remained the outsider. When Kelsey went off to college, I thought the distance might reset things. I sent her monthly allowances, paid her tuition, even bought her a used car in her junior year. She never once said thank you. Not in a card, not in a call. But she did post about it, finally got wheels. About time. As if the universe just handed her a car on schedule, and not the man she ignored for years. Still, I never withheld. I believed in family. I believed in showing love, even when it wasn't returned. But over time, the giving started to feel like bleeding. When you keep handing over pieces of yourself, and all you get in return is silence, it begins to hollow you out. I stopped expecting gratitude. I convinced myself that giving without return was a form of strength. But deep down, resentment brewed like coffee left too long on the burner, bitter, thick, and hard to ignore. Sandra never addressed it, not really. She'd roll her eyes when I brought it up, tell me I was reading too much into things, that Kelsey's just not expressive like that. And so I silenced myself. For peace. For marriage. For the dream of one day, maybe, being seen. The years ticked by. The business grew. I started considering retirement. Not a full stop, but a transition. Something more hands-off. I wanted to travel, breathe, maybe even write. That's when I first called my lawyer to draft the initial version of my will. It felt surreal, confronting your mortality with ink and legalese. I didn't tell anyone, not Sandra, not Kelsey. But I remember the day the lawyer came by to drop off paperwork. Kelsey had popped in unexpectedly for dinner, something she hadn't done in months. She noticed the documents on the table, asked casually, "What's all this?" I gave her a vague answer. Estate planning, and watched the flicker in her eyes. It was like someone lit a match behind her pupils. From that day, her tone changed. She'd call me Dad in front of guests. She offered to bring over groceries. She asked me about my health, my diet, even offered to help organize my office, something she had never shown the slightest interest in. At first, I was confused, then flattered, then suspicious. A man knows when someone is selling him a performance, especially when he's been ignored for 20 years. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't sincere. But the final nail was the dinner, exactly 2 weeks after she saw those papers. We were eating in the sunroom, Sandra sipping wine, the cicadas humming outside. Kelsey leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and said sweetly, "So, have you decided what's happening with the company? I mean, are you keeping it in the family?" That was the moment it all clicked. Her kindness, the sudden presence, the overly rehearsed affection. It wasn't love. It was a campaign. And I wasn't the man she was trying to love. I was the asset she was trying to acquire. There was something about the way she said family that made my skin crawl. It rolled off her tongue like a rehearsed line, coated in artificial sweetness, like syrup poured over a spoiled meal to hide the rot. I looked at her across the table. Kelsey, my stepdaughter, the same girl who used to whisper to her mother when I walked into the room, who once told a friend in my presence that I was just the guy her mom married. Now here she was, smiling at me like I was the grandfather of her unborn children, asking about the company like it had always been understood that it would one day be hers. That moment snapped something loose in me. Not rage, not even sadness, just clarity. A clarity so sharp it cut through 20 years of disappointment like a razor. I didn't answer her right away. I wanted to see what she'd do with the silence. I set down my fork, took a sip of water, and just looked at her. Her smile wavered for half a second, so quick it would have passed unnoticed to someone who didn't know what to look for. But I'd been watching her for 20 years. I knew that flicker, that hesitation, that barely disguised panic that surfaces when a manipulator thinks they may have overplayed their hand. Sandra, oblivious or pretending to be, jumped in to fill the gap. I think what Kelsey means is, it's such a big part of our lives. It'd be nice to keep it in the family, you know? And there it was again, our lives. Our family. As if I had never been the one who stayed up running payroll when we couldn't afford an accountant. As if I hadn't missed birthdays, holidays, even my own mother's funeral to make that company survive its first brutal decade. After dinner, I excused myself early, left them chatting in the kitchen while I walked out onto the porch. The air was thick with August heat, but I needed it. Needed space to think, to breathe. I leaned on the railing, listening to the cicadas screeching in the trees, and felt that all too familiar ache in my chest. Not a heart attack, just the slow, corrosive kind of hurt that builds over years of being overlooked. I thought about Kelsey's question. Not the words, but the intent behind them. There was no curiosity in her voice. No humility. It wasn't a question, it was a prompt. A test. A soft push to see how close she was to the finish line. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake next to Sandra, staring at the ceiling fan slicing through the air like clock hands. I couldn't slow down. My mind kept circling the same thought. If Kelsey had never seen those estate papers, would she have even called me this month? Would she have remembered my birthday in June? Would she have asked about my blood pressure, my cholesterol, my business? I already knew the answer. So I made a decision. One I never thought I'd have to make, but one I knew I wouldn't regret. I called an old contact the next morning, a private investigator named Ben. We hadn't spoken in years, but he owed me a favor. I told him everything. I wanted a full picture of Kelsey's life, the real one, not the polished, rehearsed, filtered version she showed us. I needed to know who she really was when she thought no one was watching. Ben didn't ask questions. He said he'd get back to me in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That number hung in my mind like a deadline I didn't know I was preparing for. In those 14 days, Kelsey turned up at the house 5 times. 5. That was more than I'd seen her in the last 6 months combined. She brought me pastries, asked if I needed help with errands, even suggested we go through some of the office files together to prep for the future. It was surreal, like watching a poorly directed play where the actress kept forgetting her lines. Her compliments were forced, her laugh offbeat, her attempts at connection transparently awkward. At one point, She asked if I wanted to go golfing. I don't even play golf. She knows that. Sandra was delighted. She kept saying things like, see? She's maturing. She's finally realizing what matters. And maybe part of her believed that. Maybe part of her wanted to believe it so badly she couldn't see the script Kelsey was reading from. But I saw it. Every stumble, every lie, every clumsy attempt to worm her way into my good graces. She'd had 20 years to be kind. 20 years to sit down next to me and ask me about the business, about how I built it, about who I was outside of being the man who paid the bills. But she waited until she thought I might be gone soon. That's what stung most. Not the manipulation, but the timing. It told me exactly where I stood on her list of priorities. When Ben called me, his tone said it all. You might want to sit down for this, he said. I didn't. I stood, right there in my home office, and listened to him detail things I had suspected, but still wasn't fully prepared to hear. Kelsey had been bad-mouthing me for years, to friends, co-workers, even her therapist. She'd told someone at a party that she was just playing the long game, and that, once he croaks, the empire's mine. She had quietly funneled money from one of Sandra's accounts into her own and lied about it when caught. There were receipts, screenshots, recordings. Every bit of it cataloged, organized, and time-stamped. It wasn't just disrespect. It was entitlement. Calculated, long-term entitlement. I thanked Ben and told him to send everything over in a physical binder. I wanted it in my hands. Wanted to see the truth laid bare in black and white. When the package arrived, I didn't open it right away. I waited until Kelsey's next visit. She showed up with a tray of muffins and a folder labeled Succession Plan Ideas. I let her sit down. I let her ramble. And then I set the binder down between us. She blinked at it, confused. What's this? She asked. I didn't answer. I just nodded toward it. Go ahead. Open it. She did. The silence in the room shifted like pressure before a storm. Her hands trembled as she flipped open the binder. It was thick, an inch at least, lined with page protectors and color-coded tabs. Neat. Precise. Brutal. I watched her eyes scan the first page. Her lips pressed into a thin line. No fake smile this time. No sweet voice. Just silence so sharp, I could feel it cutting into the air between us. The first tab had labeled screenshots, texts, social posts, emails. The second, financial discrepancies tied back to her online transfers from her mother's account. Then the voice transcription started, quotes she'd said to people I didn't even know existed, about me, my death, my business. I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to sit in it, to feel the weight of her own words printed out in black ink on white paper. You can't gaslight a transcript. The room grew thick with tension. She didn't ask who gave me the report. She knew. Her fingers curled around the binder like she might close it, toss it aside, pretend it didn't matter. But it did. Every breath she took was heavier than the last. I could see her calculation ticking behind her eyes. Debate, denial, deflection, all of them racing to catch up to the moment. She didn't expect this. She thought I'd go soft, that I'd see the muffins, hear the false praise, and mistake it for love. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't the man who accepted scraps of kindness and called it a meal. I didn't mean most of that, she said finally, her voice hoarse. You know how people talk when they're angry or drunk, or... I raised my hand, not to silence her, but to stop the performance from continuing. She froze, lips parted, eyes wide. I gave you 20 years, I said. 20. And in all that time, I didn't ask for love. I didn't ask for loyalty. I asked for respect. You couldn't give me that, not once. Not until you thought I had something you wanted. Her mouth opened again, ready to object, but I leaned forward and cut her off. I want you to understand something. That company, it's not going to you. Not a share. Not a cent. And after what I've seen, I'm making sure it never will. The look in her eyes shifted from panic to desperation. It was subtle but unmistakable. The drop in her shoulders, the trembling hands pressed against the table. Please, she said. One word. Just that. It didn't come out smooth. It cracked halfway through like her throat couldn't carry the weight of what it meant. I was stupid, she added, voice shaky. I was young and... Look, I didn't know you'd ever see any of that. I didn't think you were even paying attention. I was angry. I was hurting. I don't know. The words kept coming, clumsy and fractured. You always looked like you had everything together. You had mom. You had the business. I just felt like I was in the way. That's when it hit me. She didn't feel guilty. Not really. What she felt was exposed. Caught. Her apology wasn't for what she'd done, but for the fact that I found out. That she couldn't keep the con going. And maybe a part of her really did feel small, ashamed, maybe even sorry in a vague way. But regret wasn't enough. Not after years of mockery, manipulation, and manufactured affection. I'd watched her hurt her mother financially, emotionally, all while playing the wounded daughter. I saw the way Sandra bent over backwards to protect her, how she gaslit herself, minimized every outburst, every act of betrayal. I wasn't going to play that game anymore. That kind of love wasn't love. It was cowardice dressed up in motherhood. She reached across the table then, fingers outstretched, like that one motion might undo it all. Can we just talk about this? Just us? Without the papers, without the anger. But it was too late for that. Way too late. You don't get to rewrite the story now, I told her. This is your legacy, Kelsey. You wrote it. You lived it. And now you get to carry it. Her eyes filled with tears, and I didn't flinch. Not because I'm heartless, but because I've seen her cry before. She cried when I caught her in lies, cried when I didn't cave to her demands, cried when it suited her agenda. She used tears like currency, and I had nothing left to give. Sandra entered the room not long after. She saw the binder, saw the red in Kelsey's eyes, and immediately turned to me. What did you do? She asked. Not her. Me. That moment, as small as it seemed, was the final confirmation I didn't even realize I needed. For years, I told myself she just didn't know how bad it was. That if she ever saw it all laid out, she'd understand. But she didn't ask what happened. She didn't open the binder. She didn't even look at her daughter. She looked at me. The man who paid for everything, built everything, stayed through everything, and blamed me. I stood up slowly, looked at both of them. Kelsey, crumbling under the weight of her exposure, and Sandra, clinging to the illusion of innocence she'd carefully maintained for 2 decades. She's not getting anything, I said clearly. Not the house, not the company, not the car, not a check, not a ring. She will never profit from pretending to love someone she despised. Sandra's face hardened, the way it always did when she didn't want to face a truth she couldn't argue against. You're being cruel, she said. And I nodded. Maybe, but I'm finally being honest. The room went silent again. Kelsey didn't speak. Sandra didn't chase me. I left them sitting there, surrounded by evidence and silence. The truth had finally filled the space where lies used to live, and no one knew what to do with it. The next morning, the house was quieter than it had ever been, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I didn't hear the usual clink of Sandra's coffee mug or the rustle of her slippers down the hallway. No humming, no news radio murmuring from the kitchen. Just silence, heavy and cold. I sat alone in my office, staring out the window at the backyard where I'd once imagined hosting grandkids' birthday parties and family cookouts. That dream felt so distant now it might as well have belonged to another man. The binder sat on my desk, closed but not forgotten. The weight of it wasn't in the pages, it was in the clarity it forced. I couldn't unsee what I saw, couldn't unknow the things I now knew. It wasn't even 9 a.m. when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, not the kind of knock Kelsey had ever used in her life. I didn't answer at first. I let it hang there, just to see if she'd walk away. She didn't. The second knock came, firmer this time, and followed by a voice. Please, she said, can I talk to you? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I stood up, opened the door, and found her there, eyes puffy, hair still damp from a hasty shower, her hands clasped in front of her like a child waiting for punishment. You've got 10 minutes, I said, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, clutching her phone like it was a life vest. She sat across from me, but not like she had before, not with confidence or rehearsed charm. This time, her knees were close together, her back slightly hunched, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't come for money, she said. I didn't mean to come off like that. I didn't know how to connect with you. I didn't know how to be around you. I didn't respond. I wanted to hear it all. No prompting, no saving, just truth, if she could muster it. I was angry at Mom for marrying you, she continued. I thought she was replacing my dad. And when I realized you were staying, that you weren't going anywhere, I didn't know how to deal with it. So I pushed you away. I was mean. And then it just became easier to keep doing it than to admit I was wrong. That confession landed like a stone dropped into a still pond. Ripples of emotion surged in me. Resentment, yes, but also a twinge of something I hadn't felt toward her in a long time. Pity. Not compassion, not forgiveness, pity. Because I could finally see it. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't clever or calculating, not in the way I had once feared. She was broken. A grown woman still stuck in the shadow of a teenage grudge she didn't know how to let go of. But pity isn't trust, and it sure as hell isn't redemption. So why now? I asked. Why the sudden change? Why the muffins, the fake smiles, the rehearsed interest in the business? She looked down, her voice even softer. Because I realized you were dying. The words hung in the air like smoke. I'm not dying, I replied, more confused than angry. She looked up, startled. You're not. No, I said flatly. I'm not dying. I'm planning. I'm organizing my affairs, like any responsible adult should. Her face turned red, embarrassment climbing her neck like a rash. I thought, when I saw the papers, I thought maybe you were trying to tie things up. I panicked. There it was. The truth. She didn't love me. She didn't even really respect me. But she feared losing access to what I could give, to what I might leave behind. She didn't show up because she missed me. She showed up because she assumed the clock was ticking and she hadn't cashed in yet. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of carrying the weight of other people's denial. Tired of being the emotional mule in this family. Tired of being the only one who said what he actually felt. She reached into her purse and pulled out a letter, handwritten, folded neatly. I wrote this last night. I don't expect it to change anything, but I wanted you to have it. I didn't take it right away. I stared at it, that small square of paper trembling in her fingers like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Eventually, I reached out and took it. I didn't promise to read it. I didn't say thank you. I just placed it beside the binder on my desk and looked back at her. What do you want from me, Kelsey? Not the company. Not the money. What do you actually want? That question shook her. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, they didn't feel like part of the act. I don't know, she whispered. I think I just want you to not hate me. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and said the most honest thing I could. I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, and I don't owe you anything beyond honesty. You earned the distance between us, and now you'll have to live with it. She nodded, swallowing hard. I could see the words forming. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll do better. But none of them made it past her lips. Sandra showed up at the door a few minutes later. Her face was stiff, unreadable. Everything okay? She asked. Kelsey just nodded and walked past her without a word. I didn't invite Sandra in. She stepped inside anyway. You're breaking her, she said. I looked her dead in the eye. No, I'm finally holding her accountable. There's a difference. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Maybe she saw the steel in my eyes. Maybe she finally realized I wasn't going to budge. She's still your daughter, she said softly. And I'm still your husband, I replied. But that didn't stop you from letting her treat me like a stranger for 2 decades. She left without saying another word. The house changed after that. Not suddenly, not like a door slamming shut, but gradually, like air leaking from a tire, quiet and slow until one day you realize you're sitting on the rim. Sandra moved through the rooms like a ghost. She didn't speak to me unless she had to. No more idle chatter over coffee, no casual touch on the arm when passing in the hallway. We became 2 people sharing square footage, not a life. She slept in the guest room most nights. At first, she blamed stress, then allergies. Eventually, she stopped offering explanations altogether. I didn't chase her. I'd spent too many years being the only one doing the emotional lifting in this house. If she was uncomfortable living with the consequences of her silence, that wasn't my burden to fix. The silence between us spilled outward like oil. Friends who used to invite us to dinner stopped calling. At first, I thought it was coincidence, schedules, life, the usual ebb and flow. But then I saw the posts. A photo of Sandra and Kelsey at brunch with mutual friends. The caption read, "Strong women don't let anyone tear them down." Subtle, passive, but not ambiguous. Word had gotten out. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough of a version that cast me as the cold stepfather who disinherited his own family. I wasn't surprised. People love a good villain, and they'll make one out of whoever refuses to pretend anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. Let them gossip. Let them speculate. I wasn't about to beg strangers to understand choices I made to protect my peace. One afternoon, I went to the hardware store, and a man I'd known for 15 years, a supplier I used to have lunch with, pretended not to see me. Looked right past me like I was invisible. That one stung more than I expected. Not because I needed his friendship, but because it was the first time I felt the social cost of holding a boundary. It wasn't just about Kelsey anymore. It was about a narrative. One where men like me, quiet, steady, providers, aren't allowed to have breaking points without being branded as bitter. I could feel it in the stares, in the subtle shift of tone when people spoke to me in town. My name, once associated with generosity, with building something from nothing, had become a cautionary tale. Sandra and I had a blowout 2 weeks later. She cornered me in the kitchen, voice low and trembling with rage. "You've humiliated her," she said. "She's seeing a therapist twice a week now. She's not eating." I kept my hands steady as I buttered toast, because I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to snap, to yell, to give her a reason to shift the focus from Kelsey's actions to my reaction. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Good. Let her sit with the weight of what she did. Maybe for the first time in her life, she'll grow from it." Sandra slammed the cabinet door so hard the glass rattled. "You're cruel," she hissed. I didn't flinch. "And you're complicit," I replied. "You spent 20 years letting her get away with everything because it was easier than parenting. Now she's an adult with consequences, and you want me to shield her again. I'm done, Sandra. I'm done protecting everyone from themselves." She cried that night. I heard her through the wall. And I'll be honest, there was a part of me, a very human part, that almost folded, that almost knocked on the door, apologized, tried to salvage something out of the wreckage. But then I remembered the look on Kelsey's face when she realized her performance didn't work. I remembered the way Sandra didn't even glance at the binder before accusing me of being the aggressor. That night of tears wasn't about guilt. It was about control being lost. And I wouldn't be manipulated by someone else's discomfort anymore. The company thrived through it all. My team, the people who had walked beside me through recessions and expansions and lawsuits and late nights, didn't blink when I told them my estate would go to someone other than my stepdaughter. In fact, a few of them quietly expressed relief. They'd seen Kelsey's attitude during her brief internship one summer, showing up late, talking down to employees, acting like she owned the place. One even told me, "We all knew she thought she'd inherit it. Glad you saw through her." That was the closest thing I got to validation during those months, and it meant more than they probably knew. I had lunch with Thomas, my operations manager, the week after I finalized the new will. He'd been with me since the early days, knew the smell of the first warehouse, the ache in our backs when we moved boxes ourselves, the fear when we almost lost it all in year 3. I told him the truth, that the company would be his someday, not just handed over. He'd earn it over the next 5 years, stepping fully into leadership, equity granted each year as he hit benchmarks. His eyes welled up. "I never expected this," he said. "I always thought it'd go to family." I nodded. "It is going to family," I said, "just not the one I married into." That conversation healed something in me. For the first time since the confrontation, I felt peace. Not vengeance. Not victory. Just stillness. Like a man who finally set down a weight he didn't know he was carrying. I drove home that night with the windows down, the summer air washing over me, and I didn't think once about what Kelsey or Sandra were doing. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing someone else's feelings. I was just existing fully on my own terms. But the silence at home remained. Cold. Tense. Final. The house never quite felt like home again. Not after everything. Sandra and I continued sharing space, but not a life. Our marriage didn't end in court filings or dramatic exits. It dissolved quietly, like sugar in cold water. There, but no longer part of anything sweet. We stopped eating together. Conversations were reduced to logistics, bills, repairs, schedules. I'd see her glance at me sometimes like she was searching for the version of me she used to control with silence and guilt. But that version was gone. And what replaced him was a man finally at peace with being misunderstood. I didn't need anyone's permission to feel justified anymore. For years, I thought validation would come when someone finally said, "You were right." But I learned something quieter and more powerful. Peace doesn't come from being agreed with. It comes from knowing you told the truth, even when it made you the villain in someone else's story. That truth cost me the illusion of family. It cost me friendships. It cost me the woman I once believed I'd grow old with. But it gave me back something far more valuable, my self-respect. And for the first time in a long time, I no longer felt like I was living in a house built on compromise. I was standing in the aftermath of my own backbone. Kelsey moved to another state about 3 months after our confrontation. Sandra told me in passing, like she was reporting the weather. She got a job offer. Said it's a good opportunity. I nodded. Didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. I didn't need to know how she was doing or if she was happy. That chapter was closed. But a week later, an envelope arrived. No return address, just my name in handwriting I recognized instantly. Inside was a photograph, me and Kelsey, from nearly 20 years ago, sitting at a family picnic. I remembered that day. She was 13. We had just finished eating, and I'd offered to show her how to build a small fire in the stone pit. She was actually smiling in the picture. Not politely, genuinely. It caught me off guard. Folded behind the photo was a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting again, uneven and hurried. I don't expect forgiveness. I know I lost the right to ask for anything. But I'm starting therapy seriously this time. I'm trying to figure out why I've treated people the way I have. I know it's too late for us. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry. I stared at those words for a long time. Not because they made me emotional, but because they didn't. They felt honest. And because of that, they didn't change a thing. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes, it just means letting go of the last piece of anger. I didn't respond. I didn't tear it up, either. I tucked it back into the envelope and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. Not to revisit, just to acknowledge. That moment was hers. She could grow from it. But it wouldn't rewrite the years we lost or the decisions I had made. I finalized the trust documents the following week. The company, now co-owned by Thomas and a few other senior team members, would remain operational with the same values we built it on. Every major employee would receive annual dividends based on performance. No family members could ever override decisions, no matter what bloodline they claimed. I donated a portion of my estate to a local education fund, anonymously, not out of spite, but because I wanted my life's work to touch people who never asked me for anything but opportunity. That's the legacy I wanted. Not one of bitterness, but of boundaries. Sandra never asked about the will again. I think she knew. And in her own way, maybe she accepted it. Or maybe she was just tired. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes like she wanted to say something. Maybe to defend Kelsey one last time. Maybe to apologize, but the words never came. And I didn't ask for them. She had made her choices. I had made mine. We were just two people, living in the ruins of a house built on silence and denial. Some nights, I'd sit out on the porch with a glass of scotch, the same one where I first realized Kelsey had changed her tune the moment she saw the will. And I'd think about the version of me from a year ago, tolerant, hopeful, waiting for people to become what they never intended to be. That man was gone. I'm not angry anymore. That surprises people when I say it. They assume stories like this end with bitterness or regret. But I've come to understand that strength isn't in reconciliation, it's in resistance. In choosing peace over performative harmony. In refusing to reward manipulation just because it's dressed up as family. I will never again confuse proximity for love or blood for loyalty. And if that makes me the cold one, so be it. I'd rather be cold and clear than warm and walked over. A friend of mine, one of the few who stayed neutral, once asked me if I'd ever consider making amends. I told him the truth. There's nothing to mend when the damage was always one-sided. I didn't break anything. I simply stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. And that's the thing about boundaries. They're not meant to punish. They're meant to protect. Not just from others, but from the part of ourselves that keeps hoping people will change when they've shown us who they really are. I didn't get the family I imagined when I married Sandra. I got something far more painful, but far more revealing. A crash course in self-worth. Kelsey may have left with nothing material, but I left with something most people never claim in their lifetime. The right to say no more. The right to walk away. The right to choose peace over obligation. That's what I leave behind. Not just a company, or a trust, or a name, but a legacy of refusal. Of standing tall when it would have been easier to cave. And of learning, finally and fully, that being right doesn't mean being loved, and being loved doesn't always mean being safe. But being honest? That saved me. If you've ever been cast as the villain for setting boundaries with the people who never truly respected you, this story was for you. Sometimes, standing your ground means standing alone, but peace is worth the price. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Your voice matters. Share your story, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth, strength, and hard-earned freedom. See you soon in the next story.